You can get started.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Okay, so can you guys see my screen?
No. Oh, here it is. Okay, we can see it
Okay.
now.
Okay, so the first question that was thrown out to me is, many people find Google Analytics overwhelming. Where should they start? So first, just to address the overwhelming part, if you feel overwhelmed by Google Analytics, you're in very, very good company because the Google team has iterated on it so quickly, especially in the past 3 years. Especially since Justin Cutroni kind of took the wheels. So they're iterating on it a lot, they're improving it a lot, but we've almost hit a point of diminishing returns where there are so many changes and so many new things that it can really be easy just to get tangled up in it all. So we're going to address later in the webinar some resources if you want to learn more about how to really rock Google Analytics. But if you're new to using Google Analytics, you only have a little bit of time and you just kind of, want to dip your big toe in the water, I think, and this is my opinion, but I spend a lot of time in Google Analytics, and not all of the reports over here, these are called the standard reports over here. A lot of people think that this is Google Analytics. This isn't. These are really just templates where Google didn't want you to start with a blank screen. So they gave us some templated reports. The real magic with Google Analytics happens in the custom reports where you can go and get exactly what you want. And if you haven't worked with custom reports, just Google Annie Cushing, or even just Annie. I think I'm the only Annie addressing Google Analytics. Custom reports. I have a video that just takes you by the hand and walks you through how to create custom reports. But you have all of these standard reports that you can kind of use as a jumping off point. In my opinion, hands down, the most valuable standard report that we have in Google Analytics is right here. I don't know if you can see where I'm hovering, but it's called the channels report. And when you go into this report, so Google gave us the dimension that fuels this is called the default channel grouping, super geek speak for just channels. Someone wasn't hugged enough as a child. And so up until 2013, we didn't have this channels report. We had to look at mediums, or maybe like the source medium report, which is super noisy. I don't like the source medium report at all. Facebook alone causes so much drama because Facebook can show up as up to, I believe, 16 different referrals. But people don't know that, so they see the first instance of Facebook and think that's their Facebook traffic. So in 2013, Google kind of took a pooper scooper to the medium dimension and kind of grouped similar mediums together and gave us this report. One of the things that I absolutely adore about this report is depending on what you click through to, you're going to have different options. So I have a whole video just on the magic of this social line item here, because Google gives us all these social reports. I have a whole video where I actually walk step by step through each of these reports. In my opinion, these are, they all have really significant issues with them, from kind of weird or inadequate to like questioning, were drugs involved? I mean, especially the conversions report, super weird. But in my opinion, the most valuable social report is what you get when you click on the social line item. Because, and we'll just use that as a first example, you'll see you drill down to the social network. So now this social network dimension is a very valuable dimension because it takes all of those different referrals from Facebook. From most of them, there's only one or two referrals per social network. Like Twitter has twitter.com, t.co. Google Plus has plus.google.com and one other. But the rest of them, it's pretty much just one referral. But Facebook, depending on the size of the site, like I said, can have, I believe it's up to 16 different referrals. So that's a lot of noise. But with this social network dimension, it pulls all of your Facebook referrals together, even links that you tag as Facebook, which is very, very valuable. If you don't know what campaign tagging is, just search campaign tagging. And I believe in most countries, my massive campaign tagging guide comes up first in Google. And it really takes you by the hand and walks you through all of the highly nuanced aspect of campaign tagging in Google Analytics. But the other thing that I like about the channel, starting from the channels report, is that you get really valuable metrics like bounce rate and conversion. So if you're running e-commerce on your site, you have e-commerce data. If you're primarily using goals, then you can switch goals conversions here to all of your goals or a specific goal. Whereas none of the social reports, for whatever reason, have conversion data. They also don't have bounce rate. And I think that aside from sessions, bounce rate and conversion data are really some of the most essential metrics that you really need. So
Annie, just to kind of summarize this, basically what you're saying is that we really want to make sure that we're actually, if we're looking at social traffic, we want to look in channels and actually go into socials, into the social parameter, and then kind of look at it instead of going into the social on the left-hand side, which doesn't actually offer all the tracking that we want.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So if you go into here, like this network referrals, you'll see that it uses the same social network dimension, which is great, but it's missing bounce rate. And bounce rate is a really important metric. I'll talk about that a little bit later, because it just helps you to see, how sticky is that traffic. So without that, that's a pretty important missing component in these, but then there is absolutely no conversion data. So I like that it uses the social network dimension as opposed to like source medium, something like that. But I think I'm not sure why they didn't include the conversion metrics. So so you get all of that by starting with the channels report. But you'll notice if I click on organic search, I'm obviously not going to see social network. I'm going to drill down to keyword, which I'm not sure exactly why Google does that, because everyone has not provided as their #1 keyword. However, it is very valuable to switch this primary dimension here to landing page, because now you're looking at your top organic landing pages. So
I'm just going to jump in for a second and just say that people have requested that when you mention any report, if you can say like how you get to each one, so like what you click on and where you are, just so they can click on X, then Y, then Z, just so they know how to follow you while they're in their Google Analytics. So that's what they're doing right now.
Okay, absolutely. And the channels report is under acquisition, all traffic, and then channels. So that's how you get to that. Yeah. Okay. Are you guys able to see my mouse as I move along?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. Okay. But I'll just reiterate. So this is why I think if you're going to start with anything in Google Analytics, I think the channels report is a really good report to start in. And after that would be anything under site content. So if you go to behavior, site content, particularly all pages and landing pages. So we saw where if you went to the channels report, clicked on organic or any channel, and if you change the primary dimension to landing pages, you'll be able to see just the landing pages for that particular channel. But if you want to see all of your landing pages together, then you can go to site content, landing pages, and you'll have all of that conversion data just like we saw in the channels report. It's just all aggregated together. And the difference between landing pages and all pages is that in landing pages, you're going to see conversion data. In all pages, you're not going to see conversion data because the all pages report is showing you individual hits. So if someone comes to your site, they look at, let's say, 3 pages, the landing page is one more descriptor of that overall session. Whereas you can't give credit to individual pages for the conversion, but you can for a landing page because it's a descriptor just as much as what browser did you use, what country are you coming from, what source medium did you arrive on the site using. The closest thing Google gave us is this page value metric. And so what they did was they just looked at the number of conversions you have and what pages were involved in those particular conversions, and the pages that were included in a session that resulted in a conversion will have a higher page value. So my home page is going to have a higher page value than my blog page. You can see here the home page has a page value of $1.73. My blog landing page has a page value of 31 cents. Whereas my resources page has a overall page value for this particular time period of $3.93. So that tells me, yeah, it's a good idea to send people to my resources page. So, yeah.
So Annie, how can people make sure that their data is reliable, that what they're actually tracking is correct, and that they're getting reliable data?
Yeah, so there are a few things there. One, you always want to make sure you're checking your Google Analytics data against your backend databases. They're never going to match exactly. And usually Google Analytics is going to show less than your backend database. And that's because there are a lot more people choosing Chrome extensions, other extensions that don't allow sites to track them. And where there's an issue, and I just ran into this literally just last week with a client, Google Analytics was showing significantly more conversions. And so we actually found that on some of their pages, in some categories of their site, they had migrated to Google Tag Manager, but they were still firing the Google Analytics beacon as well on the page as well as in Tag Manager. So if you ever find that Google Analytics is showing more than your backend databases, you most likely have something double firing. Either that, or maybe you just have a lot of returns and you're not using the measurement protocol to keep track of refunds. And there are a few tools that I really like to use to test. One is the Google Analytics debugger. Oh, and by the way, you can see all of the links that I'm sharing by going to bit.ly/GA-webinar. And if you open up that, that's just going to take you to a browser page with all of the links that I'll be sharing in the webinar. So if you want to open that now, it's just, again, bit.ly/GA-webinar. Then you can follow along with the resources that I share. So, so this Google Analytics debugger tool, I really, really like. And the way that it works is if you open up a page, and I'll just demonstrate with my own site here. You'll see it here. I use a bunch of Chrome extensions, but it just says GA debug, and you need to make sure it's on. And then if you go into inspect, and this is a Chrome extension, but I think there's also an extension for Firefox. But you'll be able to click on console and see if your and someone was bored on the Google Analytics team and added this, which is kind of cute. But you'll be able to see in here if the beacon is firing, and you can see here the beacon was sent, and here's more information about this particular session. Another really valuable tool is your real-time reports. So I have a blog post on how to test Google Analytics using real-time reports. This is especially valuable if you're testing like events or like some kind of conversion, something like that. And also to see if you have double firing issues. Those will show up. You just first have to identify yourself as a user. And I go through in the video how to do that, how to isolate yourself as a visitor to your own site. And there are some kind of tricks. If you're in a city, if you live in a city like I do, like Philadelphia, it's a big city. So sometimes I'm not the only one from Philadelphia on my site at that time. So then I have to kind of identify which visit is me, and then you can test from there. And then also, you can also use Tag Assistant, which is another Chrome extension from Google, particularly if you're using Google Tag Manager. So those are the big, I mean, I really like to use GA Debugger, even though I have Tag Manager on my site. I think I've just been using it for so many years. I know exactly where to look. And I go back and forth between Debugger and the real-time reports. I really like the real-time reports because I can see things as I'm doing them. So, and that just gives me the most confidence.
Okay, so our next question, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, awesome.
I just want to make sure. So the next question we have is, are there any key metrics people forget to track? What must we add to our reports? So one or two things that you see that marketers are constantly kind of missing out and should definitely add and start tracking.
Yeah, so I mean, conversion metrics aside, obviously, if you're using e-commerce tracking, I use e-commerce revenue data as a pretty huge determiner of the success of my site and blog posts and stuff like that. Aside from that, bounce rate is really, really, as Annie Cushing calls it, the golden metric. Now, one caveat about bounce rate is you need to keep in mind if you're blogging, blog posts by the nature of what they are tend to have very high bounce rates. Unless the movement between your blog and your money pages is really, really fluid, particularly visitors coming from social channels, they bounce at a very high rate. For most sites, organic traffic is probably going to have the lowest bounce rate. Well, organic and email, because people are in a different mindset than they are when they're on Facebook. When I'm on Facebook, I really don't want to leave Facebook unless it's going to make me laugh. So if it's something, especially work related, I'm going to just save it to Pocket and read it later. But bounce rate is I think, especially going back to your landing pages report, whether you're isolating landing pages from a particular channel or looking at your overall landing pages, it's really, really key. And especially if you are paying for the traffic. So I have a much lower tolerance for a high bounce rate if I'm looking at traffic from paid search, especially. Even with paid social, you're still going to tend to have a higher bounce rate, but with paid search, you literally control everything, and you are buying the keywords. You're paying someone to send traffic to your site. So if I see keywords with a high bounce rate, landing pages with a high bounce rate, then that raises a red flag, and I monitor bounce rate very closely. Another really good thing to do is if you're tracking revenue or you're using goal conversions or whatever, to look at pages that generate high revenue but also have a high bounce rate, because that's automatic gold for testing. You know that people want to throw money at you when they land on this page, but a lot of visitors are leaving. That's just like a beaker right there. Like, let's test that page and see how we can squeeze more conversions out of it.
Okay, awesome. Let me see. We're getting a bunch of questions, and I just want to let you guys know that I'm getting all your questions. I can see them, and I will get them to Annie as soon as we're done with like the main questions that were asked before. Someone asked if you can switch to GA when you're talking about it, because we can only see your Chrome web store right now. So just to make sure we're awesome, and we can continue.
Okay.
So what was our next question? Our next question was, can you mention 3 common mistakes marketers make with Google Analytics that most people don't know about or aren't aware of?
Yes, absolutely. Addressing the biggest one I address in Google Analytics audits all the time. Using mediums that Google doesn't recognize. So Google has a list of mediums that it recognizes, it endorses. There's even a list. I'll pull that up later and add it to the tabs where Google actually tells us exactly what mediums it recognizes and what it puts into different channels. But if you go, again, back to the channels report, and I don't have a lot of traffic in mind because I hawk over this like nobody's business. But this other channel, nobody knows what this is, but this is the kiss of death in Google Analytics. If Google doesn't recognize, if you use a medium that Google doesn't recognize, it's going to put that traffic into this other channel. So this is basically Google's junk drawer. And I can tell, even top publishers like Jezebel.com gets this wrong, BuzzFeed gets this wrong, Gawker, some really large publishers and large sites like Southwest.com gets this wrong. And I can look at the tags that they share. Look at the links that they share on social media that are tagged. And my eye goes right for UTM_medium. And if it's a medium that Google doesn't recognize, I know it's showing up in their other channel. And whoever is managing it's usually social media that gets hosed the most, with email coming in solid second. All of that traffic is just going to get routed to this bucket that no one looks at, because you wouldn't think like, oh, my email traffic, it might be showing up under other, or my social traffic might be showing up under other. So one thing that I highly recommend that you do is go into Google Analytics, go to your channels report, click on that other link. Now, you're always going to have some, because people will tag links that they put in their newsletter or their email or whatever, and they'll tag links to your site, even though they're not supposed to. I compare that. I talk about that like painting your neighbor's fence. So I'll have other people's tags show up in my other. But then if you change the primary dimension here to, click on other and change it to medium. This will tell you what mediums Google doesn't recognize. And when I'm doing an audit, I will go through these line by line, and I'll see, oh, retargeting. Google doesn't recognize that as a channel. It absolutely should. It should have a default channel for retargeting. It should have a default channel for paid social. I'll get to that more in a minute, but it doesn't. Also, one thing that's very, very important is if you capitalize. So you'll see sometimes like mediums like email and display in the other channel. And that's because Google doesn't recognize the medium if it's capitalized. It was a silly, silly mistake on their part, in my opinion, a huge mistake, because a lot of sites have traffic showing up in other simply because they capitalized email or display or whatever it was that they're using. So you want to go through this list of mediums and fix those. So that's the number one thing across the board, and it really can cause significant mayhem. Like I did an analytics audit probably about 4 months ago, and their other bucket was their second most trafficked bucket, and so that's just awful to see. Okay, also working from Google's default channels. As I mentioned earlier, there's some really important channels that are missing. Like Google doesn't have a channel for paid social. This comes up on Twitter quite a bit, partly because Google recommends using the medium CPC for paid social. I don't agree with that at all, because if you tag your medium CPC, it's going to show up in the paid search channel. And an ad on Instagram is not paid search. An AdWords ad, now that's paid search, because that actually shows up in a search engine. So I don't agree with that. And I have a post on how I recommend tracking social ads, which is to use a custom medium and then create a custom channel, which I show you how to do to track paid social. Some other ones that are missing, as I mentioned, retargeting. You can track retargeting as display. I just don't recommend it, because retargeted traffic behaves very differently from display traffic. Display traffic is almost throwaway traffic. It's good for branding. It doesn't generate a lot of conversions. Retargeting, especially done well, can be one of your top revenue generators. So if you put it in your display channel, you just have to make sure you segment that data. So you drill down into that channel. Again, my personal preference would be to create a custom channel for your retargeting, but then also creating custom channels for whatever is important to you. So if you're a publisher, you might have syndication agreements with other larger publishers. You might want to create a partner channel for those syndicates. If you're doing a lot of guest blogging on different sites, you could create a channel of just the sites that you have guest posts on, so that you can track that traffic differently from, like, joesixpack.com. If you're doing a lot with PR, you may want to have a PR channel that only includes things like press releases and reviews and things like that. For me, I have a lot of Google Docs that I've created for marketers. So I have a Google Docs channel because I use a custom medium that I just tagged it UTM_medium equals GDoc, I think I called it. And then I created a custom channel for Google Docs. And I also have one for templates, because I create different templates that marketers can buy and use: a site audit template, an analytics audit template, a marketing strategy guide. And all of that traffic would show up on my site as direct, because anything coming from a Word doc or PDF, it doesn't pass referral data. So that traffic all shows up as direct. Whereas by tagging it, now it's going to show up in my templates channel. So that's really, really important. And the other thing, that the third mistake that I'll mention is not removing query parameters from your URLs inside of Google Analytics. So Google Analytics gives you the option to filter out query parameters. And query parameters, you see them a lot on e-commerce sites. Like you can sort price from high to low or low to high. So it might say price equals low, and or like size equals large, color equals orange. Those are all query parameters. And when you get a bunch of those query parameters in your URLs, they can generate a significant amount of duplication in your content reports. And by content reports, I'm talking specifically about this all pages report or your landing pages report. Also the exit pages, but especially these 2 pages, because what most marketers will do is if they're looking for a particular page, they'll scroll down, they'll find their page, and they'll just click on it and say, okay, here's the traffic that I've had to this particular page, and not realize that if you have query parameters reporting, you could have tens of different versions of that page. If you're a large e-commerce site, I literally had one client, they had more than 1,000 versions of their top money pages. One way to find those, and I go into this in the blog post, but if you just drop an equal sign in your all pages report, you can start to identify query parameters, and then you just go into your view settings here, and there's this option here, exclude URL query parameters. And I go through the whole process, how to pick which query parameters you want to exclude and which ones you want to keep in there.
Awesome. Great. We're getting a ton of great questions. So we'll just move on to the next question, which is, what are the best reports to use to find leaks in your funnel? So your favorite reports, maybe 1 or 2 quick reports that people can look into to find the leaks in their funnel and identify what needs to be optimized.
Okay. So that's really easy. One thing I will say is, for the first one, if you are using e-commerce with Universal, and this, since Google updated their interface, you can't just like scroll down to reports lower on the sidebar. You actually have to close them up, which is a little annoying. But if you have upgraded to Universal, and selected enhanced e-commerce, which if you've moved to Universal and you're tracking e-commerce, I highly recommend enabling enhanced e-commerce. But there is something called a shopping behavior analysis report. Mine's not that useful because I don't have a funnel. You just come to the page and you opt to purchase or not. But if you have a funnel, this will show you where the drop off is occurring. If you're using goals, then there's a little known report under goals called the goal reverse goal path. And so this will show you, this is your goal completion location, and it will show you the previous steps, the most common previous steps. So that's one way to find it. Also, if you have funnels set up when you set up your goals, so if you go into your view settings, so I just went to admin, my particular view, and go down here to your settings. If you go to goals, I'll click on this. You go into goal details, you have the option of setting up a funnel. And if you have that funnel set up, like I said, it's not relevant for me because I don't have funnel pages. But if you do, then you'll actually see the funnels in the funnel visualization. One huge caveat here is it's pretty buggy. So you'll see people supposedly leave in the first step, but then come back in like step 4, and you know that that can't really happen. So most likely what's happening is, your Google Analytics tracking code might be too low on the page or something like that. And so they're just clicking through to the next step before Google has a chance to register that piece of the funnel. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind.
Cool. Okay, so I think we're gonna take one more question, and then we're gonna jump right into everyone's questions because there's so many.
Yeah, good. Good.
So, okay. So, what I was going to ask is, are there, once I've found the leak in the funnel, how do I prioritize what's important to fix and optimize? So many times, and I've seen this, it's really frustrating. You can you can do all the research, find the leak in a funnel, and then spend a ton of resources and time on fixing that leak, and then absolutely no change, right? Because you've dedicated your time to fixing something that doesn't really have any effect on your bottom line. So what would you recommend doing in order to prioritize?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question, because I'm not sure about the CRO space as much as the search space, but in general, among marketers, automation is all the rage, so identifying issues, automating the changes as much as possible. But kind of along the lines of what you just talked about, when you're talking about testing, that can be very, very detrimental, because you could put all of these resources into rolling out these global changes and, like you said, have little impact. So what I like to do is pull a universe of pages, or whatever it is, pages that I'm testing, or events, or whatever it is that you want to test. And I always prioritize I shouldn't say always, almost always, with very rare exception, prioritize by the pages generating ultimately the most conversions. So whether the most revenue, or something that we've put a lot of effort and resources into. But I like having, when it comes to working with your analytics, smaller test groups that you can test vis-a-vis other pages, and see if that moves the needle, and create a custom report and throw that into a dashboard up here, so that you can monitor it. I mean, practically, like, we can talk about testing, A/B testing, multivariate testing on an academic level. But the reality is, like, when I'm working with a client, if they run any kind of test, it is a no-brainer. I mean, unless they're working with a dashboarding tool like Tableau or Clipfolio or something like that, then I set it up in their tool. But if not, then I take whatever we're almost always dealing with a custom report or a filtered report. So I might go into behavior, landing page, identify the pages that we've actually changed. So I would change this filter here, landing page matches regex, and just put in the individual pages, and separate them with this character here, which just means or. It's just a pipe character, just means or. And then apply those changes. So I'll just pick a couple of pages within my site. So I'll just choose home, and I should really use regex too. Don't worry about what that means. And when I apply this, now I'm only going to be looking at my home page and my top landing page. And now I can add this to a dashboard. I can create a new dashboard. So I can call this A/B tests, choose timeline or table, and add this to the dashboard. And now I'm going to be monitoring this over time. And I'd probably go in here and actually change this to a timeline. And so now you can actually monitor this over time. You could create another report that has, and you can go in here, you can change the title to something more useful, like test pages, and then have another chart for the pages that you didn't change, and actually watch them for a month or two and see the impact. I mean, from a very practical standpoint, that's what I recommend doing.
Cool. That was very in-depth. Thank you for walking us through all that. Let's see. You guys have been asking a ton of questions. So first, there were a lot of questions about bounce rate by David, by Patrick, by Ben, all asking, which is a common question, what is a high bounce rate? What bounce rates are average? What is Rockstar? And I know it's kind of depending on industry and so many more things, but can you give us some understanding of, what bounce rate is all about and what would be the best kind of average bounce rate to look for?
Yeah, absolutely. So a good bounce rate when we're talking about like social, I would say anything really, I mean, social can run as high as in the 80s, especially if they're looking at blog pages, so I'll generally segment out my blog pages from my money pages. And I even have done that with it's something called content groupings, so that you can look at your traffic differently depending on the pages. So here I have my home page as a content grouping. I have blog, I have sales, and then my member content affiliate. So that can be helpful, but definitely with social, that's going to run high. Like on my site, in the 80s is very normal when going to a blog page. They come, they read the blog post, but like they're becoming more familiar with my brand, what I offer, things like that. When they land on my resources page, that bounce rate, even from social, is going to come down significantly. So blog pages, especially from social, it's almost like, it seems like throwaway, but it's really not, because each time they come to your site, they're building, hopefully, more confidence in your brand. They've made a mental note. They've started to identify, analytics talks about analytics, So it's very, very valuable from a branding standpoint. With PPC traffic, like any kind of, paid search traffic, legitimate paid search traffic, not Facebook, I don't like to see anything above 50% bounce rate, with fairly rare exception. So I will just hawk over particularly the keyword report, because I'm looking to see, okay, if I have a particular keyword that's sporting a 70, 80, sometimes even 90 something % bounce rate, that's just money I'm throwing away. And with paid, like I said, you control everything. So that might not be the best keyword, or maybe your matching is too broad. Maybe you're using broad matching, which is a great way to tear through your budget in no time. Or maybe you need to optimize the page better, and so that definitely warrants greater analysis. I've seen destination URLs, which is a landing page for PPC, have really high bounce rates, and have run, I've just taken a report. I can't demonstrate it because I'm currently not running AdWords reports. But I'll just take a list of the URLs, and let me go into, I'm not sure if I'll see where they would be. But I'll go here to final URLs, and I'll just export that list and run it through Screaming Frog and let the client know, hey, these pages are redirecting. If they're redirecting, the AdWords parameter can drop off, and so you're going to have, your reporting is going to be messed up. But also, you would be absolutely amazed by how many paid landing pages 404, and that you definitely don't want to happen. So So everything in between. Display tends to have a very, very high bounce rate. It's all branding for the most part. Social, I already addressed that. But the more customized you get, so like people coming from my custom channels, like they're coming from my templates channel, and in fact, let me pull that up. They tend to have lower bounce rates because they're in the midst of trying to do their first site audit or their first analytics audit. And they may come look at that particular page to learn more and, come back later. I definitely get a lot more repeat traffic from my custom channels. But yeah, so I would say overall, the ones with the lowest bounce rates should be your paid search, direct. That tends to have a much lower bounce rate. Email tends to have a lower bounce rate. Organic search tends to have a lower bounce rate. I would say anything under 50, 60% is still within the acceptable range for organic search because you have very little control over that. And but definitely anything you're paying for, I would caution against paying for campaigns that have high bounce rates.
Okay, cool. We're getting quite a few questions also about spam and bot traffic. Karthik asked about it and a few others here.
Yeah.
How do we remove spam from GA, especially the ones that don't fall under the following categories? Hostname, language, crawler. Specifically, he says, I get a lot of traffic from direct none, but I'm pretty sure that the data in GA is basically incorrect.
Yeah, well, now one thing to keep in mind is email tends to be a really big culprit in sending direct traffic. And it's the most important medium to make sure you add your campaign parameters to, because the bulk of email traffic, if it's not tagged, if you don't add those little tags to the end of the URL, you have to make sure you have at the bare minimum the medium and the source, or it won't work. But why tag the medium source and not give it a campaign name? It's like having a kid and not giving him or her a name. But so if you don't tag every link from your email that points back to your site, you are going to have a very high percentage of that show up as direct. The reason is that no referral data gets passed from desktop apps. So if you're using like Mac Mail or Outlook, referral data doesn't get passed. So it shows up as direct. Mobile apps show up as direct. No referral data gets passed. And now even email providers such as Gmail and Yahoo that default to a secure server, they also don't pass referral data. So only a tiny percentage of email traffic will show up, but it won't show up in your email channel unless you actually tag it. And you can only use the medium email. You can't use the medium like newsletter or something like that. If you want to use a custom medium, check out my channels report. My channels guide. If you just Google Annie Cushing channels guide, it's a kissing cousin to my campaign tagging guide. I also link to it from the campaign tagging guide. But you'll have to go into your channels, your custom channels, and customize them. So you would have to go into, let's say, your email channel and say, okay, in addition to system-defined channel matches email, which that's the default, also accept anything. That the reason I did this is to fortify against uppercase. If you add or medium matches regex email, even if you don't use any regex, just using this option will make it so that it's not case sensitive. But here you could say, or newsletter. Now, from this point moving forward, you would be able to use the medium of newsletter and it will show up in your email channel. So that aside, Spam is a huge issue. It's really come to the forefront recently because we had a spammer who got mad at Google because they were penalized and inundated everyone's reports with language spam. So if you go into, and Google did eventually get in front of it, but if you go to audience overview, which is the default report, you'll see your languages. I had already taken measures to prevent this with a filter that I'm going to show you. But for most people's reports, you'll see all kinds of crazy things like, Google.com and, messages about how, Trump is the best and, all kinds of crazy Russian jumble. But so two things. One, when Google put out, when Google Universal came along, they gave us this option for bot filtering, and it's under admin, and you select your particular view, and you can see here's your account, your property, your view. And if you go into your view settings, you'll see this option, but for whatever reason, they didn't select it by default. So no one knows it's there and they don't select it. And I don't know why they did that, because I can't imagine saying, what the hell, Google? What happened to all of my bot and spider traffic? So this is a no-brainer. Definitely go into every view that you use and select this. But one other thing that I highly recommend, and this, as you can tell, protected my site from all of that crazy spam. But identify the host names in your Google Analytics account. And the best way to see the host names that are reporting is to go to Audience, Technology, and click on Network, which I never use. But if you change the primary dimension to hostname, this will show you all of the subdomains that have your Google Analytics tracking code on it. So this is also a good way to identify sites that are scraping your site. Then you'll see I only have www.analytics.com and this one here. And that's because I have this filter in place. Before I put this filter in place, I had many more host names showing up here because of sites scraping. Also, lots and lots of spam sites. So one thing you can do is, it's called an include filter. And I have a blog post on how to set this up also. But if you just go to filters, you give your filter a name, go to custom, choose include, and then under the filter field, just choose host name. And tell Google, and this field here is sensitive to regex. So you just let Google know, okay, anything from analytics.com. If you had other domains or subdomains that you also wanted included in your reports, then you would just use this pipe character here and put those as well. So if you're using if you're using like Salesforce or something, you might have the Force domain or something like that. So you would just drop those in here and click save, and from this point forward, it won't affect your historical traffic, but from this point forward, then that will get rid of your spam. If you find that even with doing this, you still have issues with like language spam or whatever else spammers come up with to spam, because that's their job description, then you would just add a filter, and depending on what it is, you might want to use the exclude filter. So, if it's language spam and your other, your host name include filter isn't doing the job, then you could just identify, okay, anything that contains Trump, or they're not using a real G in the language spam. They're using like some weird character. So with one site, we just put in oogle.com and that caught it. And then there was like one other keyword that was, consistently used in the language spam. I forget what it was now. And then just click save. So, whatever they choose to spam or, exploit, then this is the place to, usually you're going to use exclude. The include, if when it comes to the host name, I think is a much better option because they're always going to be coming up with new spam domains, and so you don't want to have to try to keep on top of that. It's just easier to say only include in my reports traffic that comes to analytics.com.
Brilliant. Wow. That was really in depth. And I've taken a few notes there. So there's like a ton of more questions, but we've run out of time. And I know people are writing here that they have to go into meetings and stuff. So why don't you tell us where people can get a hold of you, where they can communicate with you? And I will also do two things. One, I will forward you all the questions everyone just asked, so you can look at them. And two, I will also send out the recording of this webinar so everyone can review it at their own time and fix everything.
Perfect. And what I'll do is I'll go through the questions, I'll answer them, and I can send that. I can either post it as a blog post or Talia, I can just send that to you so everyone will have their question answered.
Perfect. That's great. So where can people find you?
Yeah, so if you go to analytics.com, it's probably the only brand I know of that started as a joke on Twitter and became a brand. And if you go to my resources page, which is just analytics.com resources, here's where I have the paid resources, but then I also have a bunch of free resources that I've created for marketers. And that hopefully you'll get some value from.
Awesome. Annie, thank you so much for being here. It was so helpful. I learned a lot, and I know that we've been getting some amazing comments from people about how much fun and how much they've learned. Yeah, just what we wanted. And as you know, guys, we do a monthly webinar. We host different people. So I'll keep you posted about our next webinar that's coming up. And in the meantime, I'll send all your questions to Annie so that she can get back to us all.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Thank you again for having me, Talia.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.